Okay. So here we go. We are doing After Effects 3D today. That is what this lecture is about. We're going to go ahead and start from scratch. All right, so let's start from scratch. Let's make a new composition. I'm going to do 1080 at 24p, so 1920 by 1080, 24 frames a second. I'm going to start with a short shot. We're going to start with a 5-second shot. What's your question, DeAndre?
Still loading.
And I'm gonna start with I'm just gonna call this shot 1. I don't know what this is gonna be yet. We're gonna kind of play around with this a little bit and design something cool. So I kind of have a little bit of an idea in mind where we can create some 3D and make some interesting stuff. I'm kind of thinking like, let's do like a quick little, like a 5 to 7 second title where we have like a really scary face in the foreground. In the background, we're gonna create a forest out of like newspaper, which is going to look really cool. We're going to put a moon back there, maybe some additional layers of woods way in the background, and we're going to use some lighting to make, and shadows to make all this stuff look really cool. So the first thing that we're going to do is we need to bring some assets into this. So I'm going to go out to, well, we've got pexels here, so I'm going to try to find some pictures of like forest or like dead trees, I think, is what I'm gonna go for first. See if there's anything in here. Ooh, this is cool. That could work. I'm looking for like a good wide shot. Something that has kind of a flatter, ooh, this is cool right here. So this plain field in front of a mountain peak. So I'm thinking we could use the top part of this image as like the background way off in the distance behind what we're about to make. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on this one, and I'm gonna do the free download, and that's gonna bring me one picture. So what are we gonna do with our stuff as we're bringing our assets together? We're gonna put it in a folder. Very good. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna create a new folder on my desktop. Last name underscore first name underscore week 5. And maybe we add a 3D in there just for fun. All right, so I've got my folder there. I'm gonna go ahead and get into my downloads over here, list format, and I'm gonna take my daily environment forest and I'm gonna copy that and I'm gonna paste it into my folder. So we're gonna generate a list of assets in there so that we can create something interesting. What's your question, DeAndre?
So you put it in what folder?
I just put it in a folder on the desktop, dude. Make last name underscore first name, week 5, 3D. We're putting all of our stuff in a folder. So since we put that first image in there, let's go ahead and save our project too. So let's go File, Save As, and we're gonna save that into our folder as well. And we're gonna utilize our naming conventions. Last name underscore first name underscore week 5 or assignment 5, whatever you wanna call it, underscore 3D. And we're gonna save that into that same folder. So now everything so far is in the same place, and that's how we're gonna kind of roll with this. All right, so we got a good background image. Let's try to find something. I want like a scary face with some interesting lighting on it. Ooh, that skull's kind of cool. Ooh, this dude's kind of cool looking.
What the?
I'm looking for something that's gonna be easy to like mask or cut out.
Scary. Very scary.
This girl's kind of interesting. We could do something crazy with her eyes and lighting and make her look pretty creepy looking if we wanted to. The crying kid. I really kind of I like the idea of this one right here. It's not terribly difficult to cut that out, and I think we could do something cool with the eyes, and we could also do some interesting overlay and color work. So I'm gonna go ahead and pick this one.
You want us to find these two, or?
You can find, if you can find something close, that's gonna, actually, you know what, I'll pull the assets and then I'll distribute them to all of you so that you all have them. How about that? You can, if you want to, you can go along with me. That's fine. All right, so I'm downloading this picture of this woman, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and grab that from my downloads folder. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it. Yeah, we'll use all the same stuff. So don't worry about finding this exact stuff. I'll make sure that I send all this to you. All right, so let's find a couple other things. So one of the things I want to do here is I want to utilize track matting and textures. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a bunch of newspaper texture. Let's see if they've got like actual words. No, of course not. Why would they have that? Newspaper. I just want like flat, like a flat picture of a
I saw a
newspaper.
picture that
I'm
used
actually gonna
had
do
that.
Google images for this one.
Add what?
Had newspaper that was flat, but it wasn't complete. It wasn't.
Tools,
Oh.
usage rights.
Don't even worry about that for this assignment.
Alright.
Okay, this is all like
Wait a minute. Go down. There's one.
that one's pretty good. It's too small though. We need high resolution images, so we're gonna go for like higher than.
You could change the size.
I'm just gonna go newspaper. Oh, so here we go. This is a good one. Like earthquake and fired San Francisco ruins. I'm gonna say open image in new tab. That is not gonna work. Let's go to the actual. Oh, it's time. This is probably gonna be a tough one to get. Ugh, boo. I love it when they tell you it's a 4,000 pixel image and then they just give you the like crappy one. This one looks like it may work. Again, it's not linked correctly.
There's one that's like the Tombstone Epitaph. 964 by.
Yeah, I just want some good. Even this one would work.
You can just straight up write.
I only need
the
one.
image.
This one will probably work. This is actually. This actually looks like it'll work really well with the like woman's face that we're using.
Oh, I see what we're doing here.
Open image in new tab. Give me yes. This is the full deal. Okay, it's a little potato quality, but that's all right. All right, we're gonna save this one. Where is my folder? Save it into that folder. Newspaper PNG is in there. Let's see. We got a background. We got a face for the foreground. The other thing that we're gonna do here is we're gonna use track mats to create our newspaper trees in the background. So I'm gonna go tree outlines. And we'll see. Yep, that's kind of like, I want stuff like this, but I want it to look a little more scary.
Fear the leaf.
Do dead tree.
That one's pretty good right there, actually.
I just searched up scary tree outline.
I did dead tree outline.
Dead tree outline. Oh yeah, that's perfect. Wow, this is a good one right here. Yeah, that's pretty good. All right,
But there's some like.
I'm gonna right click on this one, save this one. Dead tree outline. There's some other good ones in there too. So we'll save that one. We'll see if there's any other good ones in here. That one's got a watermark on it that I don't want to deal with. I might just do tree clip art. Black and white. Yeah, there we go. This one's pretty good right here. Clip art. Yeah, this is what I want. Like, I want like stark black and white. This one's really good because it's on alpha already. Let's use that one. Sure. Save that one. What about this one? That one looks kind of cool too. We'll save a few of these so we can have multiple different types of trees in our composition.
I'm gonna need to click on those trees.
Yeah, alright, click save image as creepy clip art silhouette 1. Okay, that one's great. I like that one a lot. Cool, that one's saved. Let's go back and see if we can't find maybe one or two more. That one's kind of good. Yep, and it's on alpha, which is good.
That is a dead tree.
And a dead man.
Alright, so we've got some images to work with now. We can start piecing stuff together. Alright, so I'm going to pause this for a minute. Alright. Alright, so let's get started. We've got all of our assets. We're going to get back into After Effects and make this thing happen. Alright, So let's import all of our assets first. Go ahead,
The
Peter.
PNG assets are coming up black.
They are like black on the black background.
No, they're just all black.
Yeah.
Like
No,
straight.
that's because themselves are black.
Let me look. Let me look real quick.
No, that's not.
If they don't work, it's not the end of the world. We'll figure it out though.
It's the end.
Black on black is black.
All right. So we're importing our assets.
I just,
Let's see. Dead tree. That one looks good. JPEG. PNG. Yes, that is indeed black. Okay. All right. Let's see if we can't fix those in Photoshop
Oh, I
real
know
quick.
what's happening. I know what's happening.
Okay. Go ahead,
It's
Riley.
because of the black screen.
Yeah. Well, they're showing up black here too, but let's
Because they're PNGs.
let's try it. Okay. They work right. All right. We're okay.
wait a minute.
Yeah, it's showing the black. It's showing the alpha channel as black is what's happening.
Mine's
All right.
fine.
So let's actually click the alpha channel on. We're gonna work not with the black background for this one, at least for right now. So all right. So here's what I'm thinking in terms of how we're gonna kind of set this shot up. So what I'm seeing is this is gonna be kind of like a title reveal, right? So we're gonna have our woman's face in the foreground. We're gonna color correct her and make her look kind of scary looking. We might add some additional effects to her. Maybe we'll import like a skull image or something and overlay that on her somehow. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create this kind of forest of newspaper trees behind her. And then we're going to use that mountain way off in the background to kind of create a full 3D world that we can move the camera around in a little bit. So let's start by creating kind of a ground plane to work on. Go ahead, Connor.
Are you recording?
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's start by utilizing our newspaper. So let's just take our newspaper layer and let's put that on the composition like so.
Oh.
Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to make this layer 3D. And this is what you want to do if you're going to work on anything in After Effects 3D space. Is all you got to do is make the layer 3D. So if you're seeing modes right here and track mats, let's go ahead and hit the toggle switches and modes button. And that will bring up the modes. And then there are these little check boxes, right? You got one for motion blur, you got one for adjustment layers, or for adjustments, and then you got one for 3D. Let's click the 3D box and make that layer a 3D layer.
Wait. Yeah.
I've only got one box.
Are you seeing? Yep, there should only just be one box right there. Did you get it? Okay, so now that this layer, yeah, go ahead.
I got a little confused. Where again?
So if you're seeing the mode normal and track mat, you need to click that toggle switches modes button, and then you make the layer 3D by clicking the little 3D box right here.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, so what does that do for us? Well, first, if you look at rotation, you'll notice that you can see, and I pushed R for rotation, you can see rotation on the X, Y, and Z axis now. Whereas before we only had one axis of rotation, that was left and right. Now we have 3 axes of rotation. A word on rotation. Generally when I'm working with rotation inside of After Effects, I try to stay away from the orientation field, right? That's three additional axes of rotation, but they're all tied to one keyframe. So I almost never use the orientation option if I don't absolutely have to for some unforeseen reason. So stick with X, Y, and Z if at all possible. So let's go ahead and rotate our image on the Y-axis, and you can see that now this image is in 3D space. It rotates in 3D. If you do the same thing on the X-axis, you can see that it rotates at the other direction. And if you rotate it on the Z-axis, you can see that kind of does your kind of wheel-like rotation that you would normally have if you were looking at this as a 2D layer. Ethan, do you have a question?
Yes. Where
Okay.
do we get the 3D effect?
The 3D effect? What do you mean?
Like what's it called in the effects and presets?
It's not an effect and presets thing. It's just it's the little checkbox. Look at my screen. Little checkbox right here on the layer. If you can't see it, toggle switches and modes, and you will be able to see it.
It's more powerful than I ever imagined.
Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're going to make this kind of a ground plane for us to put all of our stuff on. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna rotate this 90 degrees on the X-axis, and you should see nothing, right? You should see a line and the arrow, because the camera well, we don't actually have a camera right now, but our view is straight on towards this layer. So we've rotated the image on the x-axis 90 degrees, and now we're going to use position, and we're going to move this down in position so that it becomes a ground plane. It becomes the bottom of our image. Go ahead, Connor. So we rotated our newspaper layer 90 degrees on the x-axis and we moved it towards the bottom of the screen, right? So we've got a couple issues straight away. Number one, it doesn't go all the way to the edge. So there's some things we can do. We could scale it. We could move it. There's, we could change the way the camera's looking at it, but we're going to use some effects and presets to kind of help out with this a little bit. Do you have another question?
Hey, look, the way that
You're not supposed to drink at these computers. Throw it away. I've told you that 3 times in class. You need to throw it away. You're not supposed to drink anything at these computers. Okay, so we have a layer. It's rotated 90 degrees on the x-axis. We want to make this our ground plane, right? So one of the things that we're going to do here is we're going to use some effects and presets to make this layer a lot bigger than it is on the screen right now. And that is, the one we're going to use is, it's called Reptile, right? So type in tile under effects and presets, and then grab Reptile and drop it on your newspaper layer. And then what we can do is, up in the effects controls, is we can expand our paper left and right on the X, Y, and Z axis. Or on the X and Y axis, I should say. So go ahead and expand your paper right, let's call it just 2,000 pixels. So we're going to expand right, we're going to expand it left, 2,000 pixels. Down and up, we'll move the image back in space even further. And you'll notice now we can actually create quite a large ground plane by using Reptile to expand our image left, right, up, and down. So I had to expand it a little bit further. So I'm expanding 4,000 pixels on the left and right, and 6,000 pixels down, which is going to push it into the background. Go ahead, Connor. What do you got?
Why is down not actually like toward?
Because we've rotated the image 90 degrees on the x-axis. So down is actually back in space. Right? At least it is for me, because it would depend on where you rotate it, right? So like, I'm gonna, so you guys can keep yours where you're at, but I'm gonna set these all back to 0 real quick, and I'm gonna change the rotation on this so you can kind of get an idea of how this is supposed to work. So like, generally when you're using this on a normal composition, this is what it would look like. Right goes right, left goes left, down goes down, and up goes up, right? So you can see how that works. All right, so I'm going to back up to where I was before here real quick like. All right, so I've expanded it right, left, and down 6,000 pixels, and I don't really need to play with that too much more right now. Now we've got a nice big ground plane. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a camera. So let's go up to Layer, New, Camera. And it's going to pull up this camera rollout. So a couple things to understand about the camera before you start moving. There's 2 types of cameras, right? In the upper left-hand corner, you can see the type. 2-node camera and 1-node camera. So a 2-node camera has what's called a point of interest, right? That's tied directly to the camera. Wherever you move the point of interest, the camera rotates. So any of you that have had 3D classes have probably played with a 3D camera before. A lot of these controls are derivative of that. If you've not had a 3D class, this is new. So there's 2 types. You've got one with a point, a fixed point of interest, where the camera will look wherever that point of interest is, and you've got one where the camera is all controlled by rotation, right? So wherever the camera is looking is just controlled by the rotation of the camera. So we're going to work with a 2-node camera. We're going to use point of interest, and we're going to move our camera around using that point of interest, and we're going to use position, X, Y, and Z, and all that good stuff. Go ahead, Connor.
One node has no point of interest?
One node has no point of interest, so it's just a free camera, and you can make it look wherever you want with rotation.
Gotcha.
Okay, so let's make a 2-node camera. You'll notice there's some other presets here. You can name your cameras, and you can actually use your camera to create cuts within your composition by creating camera 1, camera 2, camera 3, camera 4. So you can cut from one camera to another camera on your layers as you go forward. Just throwing that out there as an idea. So if you create a nice, interesting 3D geometry or 3D scape in which to put your cameras, you can cut from one camera to the next to create additional shots, which is kind of cool. We're going to work with one camera right now. You've also got presets for the focal length of your camera. So you guys have all worked with cameras before. You understand that there's lenses on cameras. The After Effects camera works the very same way. You can control the focal length of your camera. You can animate the focal length of your camera to create zooms. You can create the Hitchcock effect really easily inside of After Effects by utilizing the zoom and position of the camera. So a lot of the tricks that you can use in the real world, you can also use inside of After Effects. We're going to stay with the 50mm camera for now. Everything's in millimeters right now. The measure film size, you got, horizontal, diagonal. You don't really need to play with that stuff. There's a couple other things in here like enable depth of field. I'm going to show you how to do that in the camera rollout itself once it's on the timeline. Depth of field is it's a processor hog. So you really only want to like test your depth of field and look at your depth of field when you're like getting closer to being ready to see what your final image is going to look like, and then you can increase the quality of the depth of field as well. So I'll show you how to do that once we're in the camera. Yes, DeAndre.
Like field of view?
Field of view is basically the like angle of view or the preset for the millimeter that you're looking at in terms of the camera. But when you control the focal length of the camera, it is indeed called field of view, yes. Okay, so we got pretty much everything set up in terms of the camera. And you can come in here and control all these properties if you need to, but generally all you really need to do is depend on the presets and then just set your camera and go. And you can control all this stuff once it's inside of After Effects. So go ahead and click OK, and now we have a camera in our composition. It doesn't look like we have a camera in our composition because nothing has changed, but we do. So the next thing we're going to look at is how to look at space inside of After Effects 3D, right? So the next thing I want you guys to do is go down here to where this tab says one view and select two views horizontal, right? So it says one view right here. Go ahead and select two views horizontal, and it's going to give you two different views of your 3D scene. This is really, really helpful. And again, for those of you who have taken 3D classes, you understand that having multiple views is very, very helpful to see what you have in 3D and to place objects and all that kind of stuff. Right now we're looking at a top down, right? So if we click on this left side, you can see that we're indeed seeing it from the top. And if you use your scroll and you zoom in and zoom out, you can see that we have a camera there and that it is looking towards the center of our composition. Go ahead, DeAndre.
This actually reminds me of a lesson we did in animation class, and Riley would know this because this had something to do with camera move.
Yeah, it's camera placement.
Yeah, it's camera placement.
Okay.
Exactly. And we drew out like a bunch of scenes from like trees and mountains or whatever, and we like basically
We've got our top camera and we've got our active camera, and down here we've got a 3D pop-up that allows us to look at all these different views of our scene, right? We can see left, right, top, back, bottom. The custom view ones are really, really handy as well. So in the custom view ones, you can actually fly the custom camera around to see your 3D setup from any angle, which is really, really helpful. So if you're trying to place an object in 3D specifically, sometimes it helps to have those custom views so that you can rotate the camera of that custom view around and take it exactly where you want to take it. So
where'd you get that perspective view?
that's custom view 1. So right here in the view 3D view pop-up, I've got all those different custom views. All right, so the next tool that you're going to want to get used to is the C button, the camera button. So remember on day 1, we talked about the tools up on the top bar, right? And one of those tools was the unified camera tool. So the unified camera tool will allow you to rotate your camera, truck your camera in and out, pan your camera left and right. It allows you to control your cameras. So let's practice a little bit on our custom view 1, utilizing our unified camera tool. So you'll notice that when I'm in that custom view and I just click on the unified camera tool, I can rotate the camera around in this view to see what I'm looking at in 3D space, right? So if you push the C button multiple times, you can use the tool in different ways. So if I push the C button a couple times, I get this four cross, or this like little cross with like four arrows on it. That allows you to pan the camera left, right, and up and down. If you click it again, this allows you to truck the camera in and out from whatever rotation you're looking at the objects with. So that's the truck camera option. If you click it again, it goes back to the standard unified camera tool, which rotates it around the scene.
Wait, but there's actually a camera symbol.
Yeah. Yep, that's the unified camera tool. So when you click the C button or you click on the unified camera tool, that's what it's going to look like. There are 3 different modes. There's rotate, pan, and truck. It allows you to move your camera around in space. You need to be careful with this tool when you're working inside your active camera, because if you use this tool inside your active camera, it will move your active camera to wherever you want it to go, right? So make sure you're working inside the custom view when you're doing this. Sometimes you want to move the camera around with the camera tool in your view. You can do that to set up trucks and animation and stuff like that. But generally, where I most often I myself most often use this tool when I'm looking at my 3D setup in a custom view. That's generally when I'm using this tool. So that's when it's the most handy for me is when we're working in custom views. Okay, so that being said, I'm just going to do a couple things here. So because I don't have a ton of assets right now, I'm going to make my view window just a little bit bigger on the left and the right so that I have a little bit more space to work within my 2 views. And you can always go back to a single view, and you can work in a single view, and you can actually change which view you're looking at inside that single view if you don't want to have multiple custom views or multiple views up at the same time. For the single screen stuff, I'm probably just going to try to stick to this one view, and I'll switch between my different options. You'll notice that on this view, active camera is an option. You can go back and see your active camera at any time. Okay, does anybody have any questions about getting the layer in 3D space and the camera tool, anything like that thus far? Everybody's good? Okay, so let's continue. And I just moved my camera. All right, so we're back to the active camera view. I'm looking at a single view, and we're going to start building our 3D world here a little bit. So one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to utilize those tree cutouts to create some newspaper trees that we could put in 3D space in the background. So let's go ahead and start creating some of those. So let's go back over to our project window. So it's next to the effect controls. And let's just pick this black and white tree clip art 19 PNG, and let's drop that down on our sequence. And this again, these PNGs are, they use alpha, so if you can't see the tree, click the little toggle transparency grid button inside the view options so that you can make the tree out in space.
I have it far back.
Did you put it in 3D space already? Don't put it in 3D space yet. We're gonna finagle this tree a little bit to make it look like it's got a newspaper texture on it. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do with this tree. I'm gonna scale this tree down a little bit so that it fits my view. So I'm scaling the tree down to make it fit my view. Go ahead, Peter.
Mine's coming behind my paper.
Okay, if it's underneath the paper in terms of the layer stack, you're only going to see half of it. So make sure it's on top of the layer stack for right now.
Thank you.
Right? Yeah, no problem.
On top.
Note that layer stack becomes a lot less important when you're manipulating these objects in 3D space. Once they're in 3D space, they're all living in the same world, and whatever is closer or further from the camera is going to be visible. And then they can start intersecting each other and doing all kinds of fun stuff that way as well. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to make this black tree look like it's got the newspaper texture on it, right? So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take another copy of that newspaper texture, and I'm going to drop it over the top of this tree. And I'm going to scale this a little bit so that it covers the tree from top to bottom.
Did you just duplicate the
Nope, I did not duplicate that layer. I brought it back down from the project window. So make sure you're bringing in a new version. It's in 2D space. Both of these are in 2D space right now. And then what we're going to do is we're going to utilize the... Actually, we want the newspaper to be underneath that black and white tree layer. I apologize for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the track mat to give this clip art, or to give this tree, we're going to use the track mat to texturize this tree basically, right? So on the newspaper layer on the bottom, we're going to hit the toggle switches modes button, and we're going to utilize the track mat, and we're going to have it track mat alpha, right? So you can see track mat alpha mat is what we want to select. That's going to take the alpha channel of that PNG layer, and if I solo this, you can see this a little bit better, right? So now we have a texturized tree.
You can hardly recognize it.
Yeah, if you're looking at it with the newspaper in the background, you can hardly see it. But one thing that's really going to change that is when we start adding lights to the environment. Then we're going to have shadows, we're going to have all kinds of things. They're going to help differentiate all these trees in our world, right? Go ahead, Ethan.
You add the texture again? Sorry.
That's okay. So we've got the newspaper PNG on the bottom. Here, I'll lift this up a little bit so you guys can see a little better, right? So this is what it should look like. Newspaper PNG on the bottom, black and white tree clip art on top, and then you're setting the track matte to alpha matte. So it's looking at the alpha channel of that image. Go ahead, Connor.
Are we gonna pre-comp those two?
We could indeed pre-comp those two. That would be just fine, and we should do that because we want to utilize them as one layer in 3D space. So that is the next step. So we're going to select both those layers. We're going to right-click, and we're going to say pre-compose. Move all attributes to new composition, and adjust composition duration to the time span of the selected layers, and we're going to give it a name.
Paper tree.
Paper Tree 1. That sounds perfect. And then we're going to click OK. So right-click, select the two layers, right-click, pre-compose, and click OK. And it's important to do that. Like Connor brought up, it's important for us to do that because we want this to be one layer working in 3D space once we place it.
And then we can throw effects on top of that.
Right, so let's go ahead and let's rinse and repeat this a little bit for some of our other trees, right? So we've got this Dead Tree 1. Let's do the same thing with Dead Tree 1. So let's bring that down onto our composition.
Yeah, but it's a
That's
It doesn't matter, we can still do this. We're going to use the Luma matte instead of the alpha matte on this one. So Dead Tree 1 is down there. We're going to bring another copy of our newspaper in below that dead tree. And then instead of alpha matte, we're going to use Luma matte Dead Tree. And we need to do Luma matte inverted, it looks like. Yes.
You brought another newspaper?
Yep, another newspaper. We're gonna be using copies of this newspaper, and a couple things you can do here to like keep this interesting, so that the trees don't have the same pieces of the texture in the same place. Is you can rotate the newspaper by like say 90 degrees, and then it will look different than the other tree. So this is the tree, the new tree that I just made. That is the Luma matte version, and this is the tree that I made. Is the other version. So we got two nice trees here that we can utilize, and then we're gonna select both those layers again, right click and pre-compose, and we're gonna call this Paper Tree 2, and we're gonna click OK. What's up? Questions? It's all right.
I'm sorry, I missed that part where you added the texture then.
Okay, so it's exactly the same thing we did for the first tree, right? So you have the let's go through it one more time. Just watch my screen. Okay, so we're dragging down the newspaper layer, right? Brand new layer. Okay, and we're gonna do this with our last creepy tree here too. So we've got the creepy tree. We're gonna bring that one down, and we're gonna put it above the newspaper, right? The other thing we need to do is we need to make sure that this fits on our newspaper 100%, and it looks like this one will. I'm gonna scale this a little bit and move it around so that I get the most out of this tree. Okay, and then DeAndre, this is the part you need to watch. All right, so on the bottom newspaper layer, it's track matte, Luma matte inverted. And then with this one, we need to actually mask a little bit. We need to mask this one a little bit, right? Because the white doesn't go to the edges of the tree. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead on the newspaper layer. I'm going to mask this with just a box mask so that we don't see any of the edges of the paper.
Wait, so you track Mac for on like right clicking?
Nope. So newspaper on the bottom, tree texture on top, and then you do the track matte right here on those, and then you pre-compose after you've got it matted and set up. So I probably should double check my paper tree number 2 to make sure that it is indeed working correctly.
It was alpha inverted.
It's alpha inverted, that's correct.
And then how do you get the mask in there?
Parentheses around all my layer names.
Yeah.
If you have parentheses around your layer names, you just clicked on the source layer name thing right there. It's not a big deal. Nothing to worry about. Okay, so the other thing that we should do here real quick is we should make sure that we mask these properly so that we're not seeing stuff that we don't want to see when we bring these in 3D space, right? So I went back into my Paper Tree 2 pre-comp, and I need to fix this. So what we need to do is we need to mask the newspaper layer, right? Because that's what we're seeing on the edges. So I'm selecting my newspaper layer, I've got my box mask, and I'm just basically drawing a box around the tree to get rid of any extraneous stuff that I don't want to be seeing.
That thing is box.
Wait, did you scale the tree?
I did scale the tree. I scaled the tree down. So one thing you want to make sure is that you don't have the image is not leaving the composition, right? That's important.
Heard of things now.
So I'll come around and help you.
All I'm
guys out.
seeing is hole inside the. That's all I'm seeing.
You did it right.
That's what I did.
All right. So yep, that's right. And then the track mat's right here.
That's not mine.
Yeah,
track
that's
mat, Luma mat, and all right.
So
Now this is not mine, so I'm just gonna throw it away.
Okay, cool. Let's get this back. This is where we're going to pose, right? So then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to shrink the tree a little bit, scale, so that we can make sure that we're seeing only what we want to see. And then I'm using box maps on the newspaper.
So all I saw was in between the newspaper. That's all I saw.
There you go. And now you need to pre-compose there. So select the two layers, right click, pre-compose, paper tree 2.
Hey, can I learn up too?
Yeah.
Okay. So I got the first one with the alpha thing, the second one with the second newspaper, but in the second tree, try
Okay, hold on 1 second. So you didn't pre-compose this first, and it's causing problems, right? So right now you're track matting these two things together. They're the same layer. So take this one and put it up above where So, oh, that's the, which one's the newspaper layer?
one before or
No, okay, so you've got a newspaper layer matting a newspaper layer. So one of the, like, basically these need to be separated. So it should go dead tree, newspaper, dead tree, newspaper.
Put the mask on.
There you go. And then that should now be written correctly. And then that should be outlined. There you go. Now it's starting to look right.
yes, then you said something about
So let's make sure we're pre-composing. So click on that one, the one below it, shift, click, and then right click, pre-compose. Paper tree 1.
The only thing reveals then is the tree.
Good. Okay.
same thing with this.
Yep, correct.
So now bring it over so that you get the whole tree.
Good. Yep. And then let's just double click on that one. Double click on one.
Have you scaled the tree?
Look at it. Make sure everything's good.
Okay.
Click that.
So that right now scale the tree right there.
That looks right, right? Does it look right? Cool. Okay, and then let's go to the other paper tree. So you can hit tab actually and go back to shop one.
Move it.
And then click on the double click on the other one.
And now
Let's
create
just
your
make sure that looks right. Looks pretty good. And you can tab and go back to shop
Yep.
one. Very good. All right, you're in good shape.
Thank
Everybody's
you.
looking good so far.
How do they do the masking box mask?
Okay, yep, so you're masking the newspaper layers, right?
Did you break
Newspaper layer, yep, box mask. Yep.
So what
And
you
then
wanna
just
do?
drag it around the edge.
So
Be
right
careful
here.
before you start.
And
Do
just
that. So
grab
you're basically
a
gonna
mask.
start inside here, like as close to the edge of the paper as possible.
If this one was.
So that you're getting
This is
just.
one of those things where, yeah, I love this, right? There you go. Thanks.
There you go, and then click the alpha.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Okay, perfect, that's what you want.
Pre-compose those?
Yeah, pre-compose those
Oh,
together.
beautiful.
Good
Now I
shape.
can't
Good
see
shape.
shit.
Yeah, everybody stops looking
Now I
pretty
can't
good.
see shit.
I almost missed my shot.
Yep, that works.
I could have died right at the edge.
Cool, so far so good. Everybody's looking good.
Died
Got a master newspaper, yeah?
Greatly injured my brain.
That's right. Okay, so you
Greatly
want to
injured my
mask
brain
this
now.
paper layer,
Ooh.
not the
Brain damage. Damage.
So you can delete that mask. You don't need it.
Guy from Nobu.
Oh.
And
Brain damage. That was like my most favorite, dude. That part made me laugh so hard. Yeah, brain damage. That's like the best no-go quote ever made, dude. Best no-go quote ever. Brain damage. No, it's like brain damage. That's what he's saying, brain damage. Yeah, brain damage.
I want my family.
Yeah, mate, you guys ready for the next step? He said damage, I said damage.
All right, let's go to the next step. Here we go. All right. So the next step is we need to, well, I need to pre-compose this one real quick. So paper, tree, 3. As long as you have 1 paper tree, you're in good shape, okay? You don't need to have 3 of them like me. All right, or 4. All right, so we've got all these paper trees, and we've got a newspaper on the floor. Now we need to start putting these paper trees in 3D space. So go ahead and click your toggle switches modes, and let's turn the 3D switch on for each of those paper tree subcomps. And then we can move those subcomps around in 3D space and place them in our composition where we want them to go.
I have like so many options, and you only have that one option.
So I'm kind of moving my trees back in 3D space. You can see it's hard. It's a little tough to make out, but you can see that the trees do intersect with that ground plane, right? So if I go to my custom view and I look at this setup, you can actually see the roots poking through the bottom of my newspaper, which is fine. All right, so we're moving our trees in 3D space and placing them into the background. And kind of like making them look like they're coming out of the newspaper.
Should we be scaling these at all?
You can scale them if you would like. All right, so once we've kind of got a couple of these placed, we can start duplicating them and creating additional copies and rotating them and scaling them a little bit and creating additional trees for our paper forest. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate all 3 of these trees. I'm going to move them up, and I'm going to actually rename some of these layers so that I know what tree is what. So paper tree 4, 5, and 6. And then just command select them and then command D to duplicate. So I'm using P for position, and I'm utilizing the parameters to move them around in space. Then it is not a 3D layer yet. You need to make sure that the 3D box is checked. So in 3D space, sometimes I do utilize the actual like X, Y, and Z axes. So like if you want to move your trees around in 3D space and you want to use the mouse, it's okay to do that. You just kind of have to be careful about what you select. And then when you move them around, you want to make sure that you have one of the axes selected. So like you can see that I'm moving this tree on the Z axis. Now on the X axis. And if you hold the Shift key, you can move things around a little bit quicker so that it doesn't take forever to move these objects around in 3D space. Okay, I'll come over and give you a hand here in a second, Peter. Now that we've got our trees on our floor in the background, we're going to start working with lights. So that's one of the really fun things about working with 3D space is you can introduce lights and shadows. So let's go up and make a light for our scene. So I'm going to go up to the top, go Layer, New, Light. And then you will get the light rollout. There are multiple types of lights. So right now I have spotlight selected. There's parallel light, which basically just creates a light in a specific direction, and the light falls on the whole scene the same way everywhere, like the sunlight hitting the surface of the Earth.
Oh, that's not true.
Well, it is, because the sun is 93 million miles away. So basically, every single ray that hits the Earth is going almost the same direction. So it's a giant parallel light. What was that?
There's a moon picture that says otherwise.
Oh, show us that.
That's shadows. That's not the same as like light traveling in the same direction. Light. So the sun is basically a massive parallel light. Yes, the shadows can change direction depending on how the land is facing and whatnot. But it's basically all the light rays are hitting us coming from the same direction, because we're so far away from the sun. But that's what the parallel light does. So you got a parallel light, you got a spotlight, which acts just like a spotlight. It's got a cone on it. You can feather the edges of it. You can do all kinds of fun stuff with it. And we've got a point light, which is a point of light that radiates light in all directions. That one's pretty fun to use. And then you've got an ambient light, which you can use to bring up the ambient levels in your scene. So let's start with the point light. So let's create a point light. We're going to keep the color white for right now, and let's set the intensity to say like 75%. You'll notice that you've got some options for fall off. Right now, I would just leave fall off alone. So what fall off does is it basically has the light get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer the further away it is from the source, right? Which is exactly what happens in real life. Like you got the inverse square rule, which is where you've got inverse square clamped, which means that light falls off at, some number square to the like distance of the thing, whatever. It's lighting garbage. Sean would probably be able to tell you that rule a lot better than I would. So you got inverse square clamped. Anyway, you can create some really interesting effects with fall off. So if you want to play with fall off a little bit, you absolutely can. I'm going to leave fall off at none, but let's make this cast shadows, and let's set the shadow darkness to say like 80%, and the shadow diffusion to say like 25 pixels. Note on the bottom it says, shadows are only cast from layers with cast shadows enabled to layers with accepts shadows enabled. So we're going to learn how to do that after we put this point light in our scene. But let's go ahead and click OK, and now you can see that we have lighting in our scene. And it totally changes the look of our scene.
Actually, looks like
So let's take our light and move our light around a little bit and see how it kind of affects our scene. So I'm moving it on the x-axis, on the z-axis. If I move it way back into the background, you can see all of my trees start to disappear because there's no light hitting them.
I can't even move it.
Something's up with my light. It's not working. It's not.
Okay.
Oh, here we go. Now I can move.
That's the tree.
Be wary of if you are working in After Effects 3D and you have this button right here clicked, Draft 3D, which is a great button to click that'll shut off all your lights and 3D effects. You will see no lighting effects on your composition. It's right here next to the little Shy Guy. So if you turn Draft 3D on and off, it will allow you to kind of like, it basically shuts off all your 3D stuff so that you can move faster and you can look at animation and you can move around your scene quicker without having to render all of the lighting. So just note that that's kind of important. You want to know if that's all messed up or not.
Wait, is that something that didn't work, or what happened?
It just shuts off all the 3D effects. So you just want to make sure that's off so you can see what your lights are doing right now. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to start making these trees and the ground cast and accept shadows. So let's go in and let's look at some of our layer options here. So I'm going to go on one of my paper trees, and I'm just going to open up the paper tree layer, and I'm going to go into material options, and we can see that cast shadows is set to off. So if you want shadows to be on for any of your 3D layers, you need to turn those to on. If you want to do it for multiple layers, you can select all of your paper tree layers. You can open up one of the carrots, go into material options and click on, and it will turn cast shadows on for all of your layers.
Wait a minute. Wait, you can do that all in one.
The other thing you need to do is it needs to be on for the ground plane as well. So you need to go onto your ground plane, your newspaper ground plane, and turn accepts shadows on.
Not cast or
Nope, it should just be it should be just accepts. Cast shadows, it means that it will cast shadows on other things.
No, this is the ground. Accept shadows.
So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my light around so we can actually see this, create some shadows. So you can see if I put my light behind my trees, it indeed does cast shadows from my trees.
What the? Whoa.
No, don't duplicate.
It's a fun thing to learn.
Right?
I mean, you're
It is a
learning.
fun thing to learn. All right, so let's do this. So now that we have a light, so I'm putting this light up in the background, kind of as like a moon or a sun would almost be. Let's change the type of light to a parallel light instead of an omni light.
That can't
Wait,
be
how
right.
did you move that? Oh.
So you can just go into the light options on your point light and select parallel light. Though I don't know if you can actually have it. You can't actually have it diffuse shadows, which is kind of a bummer. It's kind of a bummer, man.
Do I have the lights on the
You
bar?
could potentially pre-comp this and
No, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this back to point because I really like the diffused shadows. And then what we'll do is we'll just move this light further into the distance, right? So the further I move this away from my my objects, the kind of more diffused my shadows get, but they also start to come all from the same direction, which is nice. And you can change the shadow diffusion so that it's not quite so intense. So I can come down here and go shadow diffusion 10 pixels instead of 25. 5 pixels. Okay. Still doesn't seem to really be doing much. And you probably also need to turn the resolution up to full. If it's only at half, it's going to render the shadows differently when it's at half resolution.
How did you get the light so far above it?
I just used the parameters, so I pushed it back to like 14,000 pixels back.
The thing is, I have the shadow behind the trees, not in front of them.
Me too.
Yeah, but that's because the light is in front of the trees. So it depends on where you position your light, right? If I move my light way forward, you're going to see that the lighting is now in front of the trees, and the shadows are cast behind the trees, right?
I'm not getting how to get it behind it.
Use the position. Z position, right? So I'm looking at position, I'm in Z space, and I'm pushing my light way off into the background.
How do I turn up the lights?
Like make it brighter?
Increasing your monitor brightness.
Yeah, that might help.
Dan, I you're the teacher.
Way to be a smart.
Yeah, I mean, I would turn it up. I noticed it was a little dim on your screen too. Like I would turn that up a little bit, like not so that your eyes are straining, but turn it up a little bit so that it's not quite so dark.
Well, I'm having everything's having a tough time lighting up on
Yep,
actual
and then pull like what way you want it, so you can just crank it on.
And we're going to add an ambient light to this scene so that we can see our trees a little bit. So ambient light affects everything in your scene. It doesn't have a source, so it's just everywhere. But you can change the ambient levels in the scene depending on to like bring out details basically. So new light ambient, and I'm going to set this to like 5%. And I'm going to click OK. And you'll notice it just brings out the edges a little bit. It's probably a little too little ambience for you to make out on your screens. But there you go. Now you can actually see the trees against the black background. Okay, so we've added some trees to this scene. We've added some lights to this scene. You guys have played around with the color, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to kind of make my light like a bluish color. So there's my ambient light. I'm going to change the color of my spot to also kind of like a bluish color. And it totally changes the tone. Now it looks like nighttime on my screen. I might give my ambient just a little bit more push. so that you guys can see it a little bit better. All right, so let's play with a couple more things. So specifically looking at our ground plane, right? So let's go back to our ground plane and go into our material options. So you have a lot of options when you create a 3D layer, right? Material options are like in 3D, right? So when you're putting, when you want to put a texture on a piece of 3D geometry in a 3D program, you add what's called a material to it. And you have materials in this as well. They're not as crazy as the materials as you'd have in a 3D program, but you have options nonetheless. You can tell it to cast and accept shadows. You can make certain layers transmit light. So like if you wanted something to be translucent and actually let the light shine through it, like let's say you wanted to have a stained glass window, right? And you wanted the light to come through the stained glass window, but you wanted the light to take on the colors of the layer. You would use light transmission for that. Let's see, so you've got ambient light, diffuse light, specular intensity, and that's specifically what I'm looking at. So that changes how shiny your objects are. You can change your specular shininess and specular intensity to make things appear more shiny. Or more metallic looking. And it can really change the look of your scene when you do that with specific ideas in mind. I'm going to change my specular shininess a little bit and make my newspaper just a little bit more diffused so that it's not quite so specular shiny. All right, so we've got some trees. Now we kind of need to fill this scene in with background planes, right? We talked about utilizing that mountain range way off in the background. So let's do a couple things. Let's go to our newspaper layer, and let's really expand that newspaper off into the distance, right? So I'm going to double the pixels. I'm going to set my expand down to 12,000 pixels, which is going to push my newspaper way off into the background, and I'm going to expand it left and right so that it fills in on both sides.
Hold up.
I'm sorry, what did you just
I'm expanding my ground plane so that it goes way off into the background. I want a clean horizon is basically what I'm trying to look at. Like we want to make sure we have enough depth in this image to do what we want to do with the composition as a whole. The newspaper ground layer, the first thing we made. I'm going to rename mine ground just so it's obvious what we're doing. A couple other little suggestions that I would say is like I like to keep my camera and my lights on the top of the timeline, because generally when you're doing animation work on your camera and whatnot, having that right up at the top is just handy. You don't have to go digging for it. Okay, so we've got trees, we've got a ground plane, we've got a light, we've got an ambient light, we've got a scene that's kind of looking pretty cool, we've got some nice shadows going on back there. There's all kinds of neat stuff that we can do with this. Okay, so let's go ahead and kind of like fill in our scene a little bit, and let's add in our, where is that? The forest, this like foresty looking background with the mountains. Let's use that. So let's bring that daylight environment forest JPEG in, and let's drop it underneath everything. So right away, you can see it's made a huge difference in terms of our look. Like I just dropped it on there in the very background, but we haven't made it quite as cool as it can be yet. So let's take that layer and let's make it 3D. And now you can see it makes things even more interesting. And then let's do a couple other things. Let's shut it off so that it doesn't cast shadows, because we don't need it to cast shadows. So let's go into the material options and turn cast shadows off. Oh, it was off.
Yeah.
That's weird.
I'm lost.
That's because it's like on top.
Accept share.
You're right. It's on top. You're right. It's intersecting with what we already have. So we need to push it. We need to push it into the background.
Okay, Mr. Rowell.
I just reacted to something cool.
Did you have a question, DeAndre?
Yeah, I'm sorry. With that picture, like, what exactly did you do again? I missed that.
Sorry. What's the question?
Yeah, right there with the picture for the background.
Uh-huh.
What did you like convert that with the newspaper?
No, I didn't do anything with it. All I did is drop it on the composition, and I made it a 3D layer, and now I'm pushing it back in 3D space.
Oh, how did you make it 3D layer?
You know how to do that. We've already done that. It's the little 3D checkbox. Every layer has one.
Got it.
Okay, so we're gonna put that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna place that picture way off in the distance. So our newspaper goes back about 12,000 pixels. So I'm gonna kind of like set that at like 13,000 pixels, just past where the edge of the horizon is for the newspaper. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it up. And if you need to, what you can do is you can just solo the paper ground and that layer, right? So I just soloed those two layers, the ground layer and the forest layer. And I'm just kind of like positioning this right now. So what I want is I basically want the edge right there. So I want that photo I want that to just create the horizon in the background. That's really all I want it for. And I'm going to scale this up so that it fills the back of my screen. And I'm going to position it just a little bit so that we get a proper horizon out of it. Right, so that's kind of what I'm looking at. And if we look at this in one of the other views, so if I go to a custom view and I rotate my camera around a little bit, I'm going to truck my camera back, you can see what this is starting to look like. So we've just got our newspaper layer, and we've got our layer of mountains way off in the distance, and I'm kind of setting mine up so that it just intersects with the very back of the newspaper layer. Go ahead.
Yeah, I need some help catching up because he was helping me out. And
Okay, all right. So we'll take. We haven't taken a break, so let's just take a few minutes. Starting to understand how this works. You're putting objects in 3D space, and you're creating a foreground, middle ground, and background, right? The closer things are to the camera in the foreground, the more they're going to move across the screen, and you're creating the illusion of depth with parallax and depth of field and all kinds of fun things that you can utilize inside of After Effects. All right, just for this demo, I'm going to get rid of my sky that I just made, and we're just going to work with what we have here. All right, so we've kind of created a neat scene, but let's get this woman in here and make something cool with her in the foreground. Like she's gonna be the piece that we focus on in the foreground, and then we're gonna maybe reveal a piece of text behind her or something like that to kind of make this a little more interesting. So let's take our adult, attractive, beautiful woman, and let's go ahead and add her to the composition. And then what we need to do with her is we need to mask her out, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So we can do that right now with her soloed, or we can double click on her. What the fuck? That's really...
I gotta bleep that one
Okay,
out.
there we go. That's weird. Yeah, I'm not bleeping that out. I say the F word every now and again. And it's recorded for posterity's sake.
Good job.
And now we-
All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to get in here and we're going to go around and just kind of roughly mask out this woman so that we can utilize her in our 3D space. I'm not going to worry too much about like the hair edges and stuff like that. If I was really planning on doing this, I would shoot somebody on green screen doing what I wanted them to do, and then I would key it and use it. But for this example, it will work just fine. So I double click the layer, so we're working on the layer directly now, and we can go in and grab the pen tool and actually mask around her. So I'm going to start on the left hand. What was that?
That pen tool's grayed out.
That's interesting. Let me come take a look at that. Let's all save real quick too, just so that we have this. So we have. So I'm going to mask her out. If you push the tilde key, it's the key right under the escape key on your keyboard. It will allow you to look at a window full screen. So I've moved into that window full screen, and now I can use this whole window to kind of help me mask her out a little bit better. And I'm going to start on the left-hand side, and I'm just going to kind of work through here. I am clicking and dragging to create a nice, smooth, curved mask, kind of around the sections of hair so that it looks pretty clean. Make sure I'm kind of like trying to make sure that I'm within her like hair border.
It won't let me select the pen tool.
Okay, so make sure that you're double clicked on the layer. That's important. And I'm just going to continue kind of drawing around her until I get a mask that will work for what I am trying to do. And if I need to, I can come back in here and either add additional masks or refine this once I've got this all laid out. And if I were to do the mountains too, this is how I would probably do it. I would do this the same way. So I'd come in on the layer and I would work the mask until I've got it nice and detailed, and I've got cut out what I need cut out. And then once you get to the edges, I'm just going around the base of the image and creating a nice clean mask like so. So I hit the tilde key again to close the window up, and then if I go back to my composition, you can see that I have this woman and she is cut out, and it will work pretty well for what I want to do. Okay, who needs help? We're going to use this woman in the background. So we made her into a 3D layer, and she's got no light on her because the light is way in the background. And so we need to add some light in the foreground to make her show up. So I'm creating a new spotlight. The color of the light right now is white. I'm setting the intensity to 25%. I'm using fall off on this light, inverse square clamped with a radius of 1,000 pixels. That means that the light will only travel 1,000 pixels from the light source, right? And it will fall off over that length of time, or length of pixels. I have cast shadows on, but I really don't need it for this particular light because we really don't need to see your shadows falling in the background. And then I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And right away you can see that nothing's really changed. So what we need to do is we need to position this light so that it's hitting her the correct way. So I'm going to go into my custom view, and I'm going to move my camera over. So I'm using the C tool and the pan to move my camera around in the view, and I'm going to zoom in here a little bit so that we can see where my light is and where my woman is. So my woman is way in the foreground, right? And my light is behind her, which is why we can't see her. So I'm going to take this light and I'm going to move this light back in Z space in front of her. And now you can see that she's lit. So if I go back to my active camera, we can see that she now has light on her. Yay! So the other thing that we can do with spotlights is we can control how big the cone is on them and how much fall off there is on the cone as well. So I'm going to go into my light options in my spotlight, and I'm going to change my cone angle a little bit so that I kind of want to like center this light around her face and her eyes. So I can move the cone around a little bit. I can move, the other thing that you'll notice with this cone light, I'm gonna go back to my custom view for just a second here, is it has a point of interest, much like the camera does, right? So the spotlight is pointed at that point of interest, and I can move that point of interest around to change where that light is aimed, right? So like, let's say I wanted this spotlight to shine directly at the center of her image, right? Which would be where?
The nose bridge.
No, the center of the image. So what is at the center of an image generally when we flop it on the timeline?
A dot.
It starts with an A and ends with a point. Anchor point. Okay, all right, so our woman, if we go into our woman's layer and we look at the anchor point, it says 623.5 and 935.0. So if I set the point of interest to those settings, we know that spotlight is going to shine directly at the center of her image. And then we can adjust the point of interest to make it go right where we want on her eyes, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually copy the anchor point. So I'm going to click on the anchor point of the woman. I'm going to hit Command C, and that's going to copy all those parameters. And I'm going to go to the spotlight, go to the point of interest, and hit Command V and paste that. And now that light is pointed directly at the center of her image.
Where's the point of interest?
Point of interest is right there when you open the transform options of the spotlight.
I'm completely lost.
You can aim it manually too if you want to, Scott. It's not the end of the world if we do it this way.
I just lost in general. I got the cone, that's it.
Okay, well you're doing fine. So just play around with how the light hits her and affects her. Play with the cone settings. Play with the intensity of the light. There's a lot of things you can play with here.
Yeah, the light's just not showing in general.
Okay, but it's because it's behind her. So you have to move the light in front of her. So use your other views and move the light so that it's in front of her. It's pointing in front of her. So check out my screen for a second, Scott. Okay, so if I go to my custom view and I'm looking at this from the side, right? So I'm going to rotate this around a little bit. I'm using the C tool. If I rotate this around, you can see that my light is indeed in front of her. She's right here. If I select her, you can see her layer a little bit better, and you can rotate the camera around and see where your light is in relation to her, right? So here's my spotlight right here. Here's the layer. You need to make sure that the spotlight is in front of her layer. Right? You got it?
Yeah.
What was that? Figure out how to do that here. I'm just gonna pull up your screen, dude, so I can help you out.
So that's going to.
Let's play with the last few cool things. So I'm going to go to my active camera view and kind of center up my camera, make sure I'm seeing everything I want to see. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start playing around with depth of field a little bit. So let's go ahead and go to our camera. So select the camera, and then let's open up the camera options. There's tons of options in here. So this is how you can animate your camera in here. You can keyframe everything, animate it. You're using the point of interest and the position, but you've got a ton of camera options as well. And inside those camera options, you have things like your focus distance, your aperture, which will come into effect when you turn depth of field on. You can also play with the focal, where is it? The zoom, you can play with the zoom, so if you want to make your camera a wider angle lens, you can do that. You can punch in, punch out. There's all kinds of stuff you can do to this. So let's go ahead and turn depth of field on. And this is going to drastically increase your rendering time, so just know that going into this. So let's turn the depth of field on, and then let's increase the aperture, say to like 250 pixels. And you should really start to see your depth of field start to blur out your image, right? So the thing that controls depth of field, let's go into our 2-view mode, so 2 views horizontal. Focus distance is what controls where your camera is focusing in 3D space, right? So if you want to do rack focuses in this, you can do that. You animate the focus distance over time. And the focus distance on the camera is noted by this kind of pink. It's a little hard to make out with all the lights and stuff going on in here. So let me just shut a couple of these lights off real quick. All right, so the focus distance is this middle pink box, right? So if I go back into my camera options and I move that focus distance, you can see that that box moves, right? So that is the plane that your camera is focusing on. So if I take that plane and line it up with my lady in the foreground, whose layer is right here. I can see her layer. So a lot of the times when I'm working inside the second view, I won't even be looking at what's happening inside the composition window. I'll just be looking at like, where's my focus plane, or where are my lights pointing, or are they pointing at the right layer? Go ahead, Ethan.
I don't have that DOF ring or DOF like control.
Okay, did you turn depth of field on?
I did.
Okay, let me look at your computer.
Thank you.
Verse 7. No, I don't want the info. You can do it, computer. I know you can. Okay, so real quick as I move forward. All right, so I'm using the focus distance to set the focus on my lady.
Oh, wait. Sorry.
You've
Focus
got it.
distance was
You've
like
got it.
Set to the same thing as the camera.
No, it's totally cool, dude. You're in good shape. All right, so I'm turning all my lights and stuff back on so we can see what we're doing here. I've kind of manipulated my focus ring. So one thing that kind of helps with that focus distance is to use the left, right, top, bottom views. So I'm gonna go just view this from the left. And the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to change my woman's layer color to something that really pops on the background. I'm going to change it to like fuchsia, freaking super crazy pink, so I can see where her layer actually is. And if I move this around, you can see that there's this bright fuchsia line, if I don't have her selected, this bright fuchsia line where her layer is. And then if I control the focus distance of the camera, I can see whether I'm focused in front or behind her layer. So I'm basically just trying to get that focus distance box to intersect right dead center with her fuchsia layer. So there's a lot of crap happening on the screens in terms of lines and where things are and all that good stuff, but just know that that's how you control where your camera is focusing, is with the focus distance. And you're gonna have to kind of like line up the focus distance using your views so you can see what's where on your screen. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my single view here real quick so that we can see kind of what's happening. So you'll notice that like, so what I'm going to do real quick just to demonstrate this is I'm going to set my focus distance here, and then I'm going to move one frame forward, and I'm going to set it off in the background. So like the trees would be in focus back there. Well, let's set this to like 5,000 pixels. There we go. So you can see between the two frames, the focus has changed.
Focus distance.
And that's all controlled by focus distance and depth of field.
Can you put the 5,000?
That's arbitrary. I'm just demonstrating. If you stretch these values out a little bit, say over the course of a second, you can create a rack focus using focus distance. So if I play this back, it will take a long time to render, but it will be cool looking when it's done. Blah bitty blah, we wait for the render to happen. So, demonstrating what a rack focus would look like over the course of a second, you can see that we can move the plane of focus from the foreground to the background or to whatever object you want the focus plane to be on, and to see that focus plane you have to be in one of your other views, and then you'll actually be able to see the focus plane change on the camera box. Okay, so let's actually make a shot out of this. That's kind of the next thing we need to do here. So I'm going to go back to my single view, and then what I kind of want to have happen here is I've got 5 seconds, right? So what I'm going to do to just facilitate animation a little bit better here is I'm going to go into draft mode, so it shuts off all my lights and the depth of field and everything, and now I can actually animate with a decent amount of speed, right? So let's actually create a little animation here with our camera. And I'm going to work on things like depth of field later once I have my camera animation set up. So one thing to note about the camera, keep it simple, stupid, like for real. Because the more nodes and points of animation you create on your camera, the more of a nightmare it's going to become for you to actually get it to do what you want it to do. So I would say keep your camera movements very, very simple. Don't try to do really crazy things with the camera straight away. Just make it like a point A to point B type of a thing with a little bit of movement to create parallax, and keep the motion simple. So like, let's say we just wanted to do like a move where the camera starts a little further back from her, and then maybe pushes in on her eyes or something like that. And that's it. Like, just a very, very simple movement. So let's start by just positioning our camera where we want it to start. And you can use the camera tool for this part. So we haven't keyframed anything yet. We're just setting our camera where we want it to go. So I'm going to set my camera to the truck mode, which has got the little arrows on the top and the bottom. And I'm just going to pull my camera back a little bit. So one thing we need to be careful of is we need to be careful of things like the ground plane being visible, right? So right now you can see that my ground plane has got, like, I can see sky behind it. We probably need to fix that. So I'm going to go in straight away and I'm going to fix that utilizing the effects that I have on my ground plane. So my expand up doesn't have any pixels on it. I'm going to set that up as high as I need it to be set so that I can make this lady work. The other thing that we can do, so what I really want to do here is I want this lady to be in 3D space, but I don't want her to intersect the ground plane, right? So right now she's intersecting the ground plane. So there's a way that you can actually separate her from the other layers, and the way that you do that is you do that with a 2D layer. So let's go make a new layer, new, adjustment layer, And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this adjustment layer between her and the other background layers, and that cuts her off of the other background layers. So she no longer intersects the ground. She's on top of those layers in the front, but she's still in 3D space. So that's a really handy useful tool. Like if you need to separate a layer from the 3D space in the background, all you need to do is put a 2D layer in between. So like a layer solid that's 2D or an adjustment. I usually use adjustment layers because they have no visibility. So unless I add an effect or something to that, you don't see any visibility with it. So now she's separated from the background layers, but she's still in 3D space. So if I move the camera around, I can still create a shot in 3D space. She still works with all the things in the 3D space. She just simply won't intersect the ground plane. Does that make sense? Sort of, kind of, a little bit. Okay, so let's make our shot. So I've used the truck tool to kind of set up where I want this camera to be. I'm gonna move the camera with the pan tool a little bit too. So I'm gonna have her start over kind of on the right-hand third, and then I'm gonna move the camera kind of in towards her eyes. And this, we could do a combination move. Like we could almost do Hitchcock effect if we wanted to. There's all kinds of neat things that you can do with the camera. So like if you truck the camera in and zoom the camera out at the same time, you get the Hitchcock effect. What's the Hitchcock effect? Let's just look at the Hitchcock effect. Here is the Hitchcock effect.
If you're a YouTuber, you're probably using this and this. So you should start using this.
Shut up. What is this?
Universal.
Oh, this is the most terrible example of a Hitchcock effect I've ever seen.
The long hallway type effect. That's what.
No, it's called the Hitchcock effect, DeAndre. He's the first guy to use it. Yeah, that's still a terrible example of the Hitchcock effect.
It's from the video from Hitchcock.
Is it just like, oh, that one will work? Is it just like...
The dolly zoom is one of the most disorienting and flashy camera techniques of all time.
That's the Hitchcock
And it shows
effect.
up in some of the most beloved scenes in cinematic history. It's
So
famous-
basically you get this is a
bizarre
much
look,
better
but the
example,
shot
like
also
that
teaches
right
us-
there. So what is happening in the Hitchcock effect is the camera is trucking in and zooming out, or the reverse of that. Trucking back and zooming in creates the Hitchcock effect.
Yes.
So like if we wanted to create the Hitchcock effect on this woman, this is how we would do it. So like let's say we want to basically keep her almost framed exactly where she's framed when we start. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just, you guys don't have to follow along with this. I'm going to set this up so that it can work. All right. So if we want the Hitchcock effect on the woman, we're going to control two things: the position of the camera and the focal length, right? So position, and we want to control the zoom or the focal length. So I'm going to zoom in on her eyes, and then I'm just going to kind of like control point of interest here too a little bit so that we can keep her framed right where we need her framed. All right, so we're zoomed in. And so we've got that part, so we got the zoom set up, and then so if we want the Hitchcock effect, what we then do is we zoom the camera back out too far, a little further in, and then we move the camera in Z space. Too close.
Whoa.
So let's just check the front. Okay, it's sort of working. I'm just gonna play this back and see what happens. So the whole idea, like the important thing about the Hitchcock effect is like your subject is supposed to remain in basically the same place in the frame, like same size, same positioning, and the background will just change around them. And the reason that is because zoom lenses compress space. So when you're on a really, really long zoom lens, it has the effect of making the space between two objects in the Z space look compressed, right? So if like, let's say you want to get that effect of like a giant sunrise behind your subject, right? You want the sunset to look huge behind them. What you do is you put the camera far away from your subject, put on like a 400 millimeter zoom, and it's gonna pull the background closer to your subject because of the way that light interacts with the lens of the camera. And this is gonna work, I think, pretty well actually. So Hitchcock effect in 5 seconds. So there you go. It's a slow Hitchcock effect, but it's a Hitchcock effect nonetheless. So she's staying basically in the same place in the frame, but the background is changing around her. That is the Hitchcock effect. So you're seeing the Hitchcock effect done in virtual space.
A lot about filmmaking. It shows the different kind of lenses and how to use them. It enhances the emotion of a scene, and it can be used in subtle places you may not have even noticed. Let's see how. The dolly zoom, or sometimes called the vertigo effect, started in Hitchcock's film Vertigo in 1958. You need a smooth track and steady zoom to pull it off nicely, which is why it wasn't developed sooner. The shot is essentially an optical illusion, caused by zooming in or out on the camera lens while tracking the camera forward or backward. The result is the foreground stays in the same position while the background appears to squeeze or stretch, depending on which direction you go.
Correct.
It actually teaches an important principle of filming, camera lens. If you ever wanted to see the difference between wide-angle and telephoto lenses, a simplified example would be to observe a dolly zoom. Compare how it begins to how it ends. The dolly zoom shot can start like a telephoto lens, where the camera is far away and the focal length is bigger. There's less background in sight because the lens concentrates on a smaller portion of it. But when you change focal length by zooming out while also pushing the camera forward, you can observe more of the background while keeping the foreground in the same place. The result is filming the same thing, but the camera expands to see more of the background. The change in focal length takes in a wider area, so you go from a telephoto shot to a wide-angle shot. You generally use telephoto in close-ups to keep attention on the foreground. When you move the camera around while using a telephoto lens, the background whips quickly behind the foreground because the camera takes in less of the background. It makes for some pretty cool shots. People also tend to look better in telephoto because their faces aren't stretched by the wider lens. Wide angle takes in more of the background, so it's better for outdoor shots when you want to capture the landscape. So each lens is a trade-off. The dolly zoom captures the transition from one kind of lens shot to the other, and it leads to different emotional responses for the viewer. Vertigo uses the dolly zoom to give a sense of height. This increase in height perfectly embodies how the telephoto has a more narrow view of the background. So we go from
Okay, so you can do the vertigo effect inside of After Effects is basically it, and this is it. This is exactly the same principle, just done in After Effects. Okay, so let's finish up creating a shot here. So I just did a quick and dirty movement here. I'm gonna move my camera around a little bit. I'm gonna set my focal length a little bit better here. I want to punch in a little bit, and I'm going to move this camera around a little bit as well. All right, so when you're creating your shots inside of After Effects, you can utilize the camera tool to kind of move things around, rotate your camera, and set your camera up for its first and second and third positions, things like that. But again, keep it simple. The more animation you add to your camera, the more difficult it's going to get to control. Oftentimes when I'm working inside of After Effects, what I'll do is I will attach the camera to a null object via parenting, and I'll move the null object around to control the camera. It compartmentalizes the camera animation so that I can control things like zoom, focal length, depth of field, all that stuff on the camera, and then where the camera's positioned in space, I will do with a null object. Video Copilot has this really nice plugin called SureTarget that does basically the same thing. It takes your camera, attaches it to a null object, and then you can actually have that null object move to positions where different layers are, and it will animate the camera automatically for you, which is really, really helpful. We're not going to do that in this instance because unfortunately SureTarget no longer works with CC 2019, and I've actually emailed Video Copilot about it and asked them if they're going to update that plugin, and it sounds like they are. They haven't gotten around to it yet because it's a really, really useful plugin. So let's just create a shot here. So let's say we just want to create a simple shot with depth of field. We want to take the camera and kind of do a dolly or a truck in on her eyes, and then maybe some text comes up in the foreground or something like that, and we'll utilize depth of field and focus a little bit to make the image interesting. So I'm going to set my camera up in terms of animation. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set keys for the point of interest and position. And I probably also want to set the focus distance right now, but I haven't animated that or set that up yet. I can, maybe I should. So I'm going to go ahead and check that. 2 views horizontal is what I'm going to look at, and I'm going to go ahead and just rotate this view around so I can see where my focus distance is set. And I had it set really close to the camera, so now I actually have to like set this focus distance up a little bit better, and I'm just kind of utilizing my views to check to make sure that the focus distance is close, and it looks like it is. So my camera is off to an angle on her a little bit, which is why you're seeing the focus distance as a box right here. And her layer is that one fuchsia outline right there, but the focus should be pretty good on her. So there we've got focus distance, position, and point of interest all set. And if I want to create like a nice 5-second move here, I move to the end of my sequence. I'm going to go back to my single view, and then I can move the camera. So I'm pushing the camera in, and then I'm also panning the camera right. And then I can use point of interest too to kind of keep framing on that right-hand third. So I've got point of interest, position, and then let's go ahead and check our... Yeah, there you go, Ethan. That's how you do it, buddy. Check out that Hitchcock move. Watch this.
What?
Hitchcock move. That's cool.
Perfect.
No, it's not perfect, but it's still pretty cool, right? Okay.
How did you blurt it out?
He's using depth of field, DeAndre. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to check that second view again, and I'm going to set my focus distance. So focus distance is going to be further away from camera. Now I'm going to pull the focus distance in so that she stays in focus while the camera is moving. And the other thing that you're going to do is if you do any keyframe interpolations, like ease in, ease out, anything like that, you want to do them for both your point of interest and position, and you want to do them for the focus distance, because all of that stuff is going to want to utilize the same types of interpolation on the keyframes. So you may want to go to the center of your move and just check to make sure your focus distance is still set correctly, and it is in this instance. Okay, so that all being said, if I want to play this back and see what it looks like in proper 3D with lighting, I can go ahead and do that. So here's kind of how our shot starts, and I really kind of want the zoom to be a little wider here. I'm going to zoom out a bit. That's better. Let's zoom out a little bit. I need to like expand my ground plane a little bit forward, so I'm going to do that too. We'll just set that to like 2000, which should fix the problem. There we go. And then we can also animate that zoom. So I set the zoom to where I want it there. I'm going to just jump to the end, and I'm going to set the zoom to where I want it here. I just wanted to zoom in a little bit at the end, so it really ends on her eyes. And now we've created a 3D shot with depth of field, lighting, shadows, pretty much all the stuff that we need to incorporate into our assignment. And I'm going to play this back at half res so we can see what we've got. So when you're working on your assignment, think about your assignment in terms of shots or a shot. So instead of trying to pile everything into one After Effects composition, separate it into individual shots like we did with our first 3-shot assignment, and then put them on a composition or cut them together in Premiere, whatever you want to do to edit your shots together. So it's very much like filmmaking in that essence, is in that you're building a shot and exporting the shot, or exporting a series of shots to create your 10 to 30 seconds. And I'm going to ease up on the requirements in terms of time. Like I said, I'm a fan of quality over quantity, so if you do one 5 to 7 second shot that's spectacular, I'm not going to like split hairs on time. So quality over quantity. So there we go. Like, that would be pretty cool if we added some text to it or something like that. You could definitely use it in a sequence. Did I show you guys the animators project? that we did in advanced After Effects class?
Wait, what?
No.
No.
All right, well, let's look at that. All right, that's where we're going to end the lecture for the day.